What up, Fight World? It's your boy Ego, and I'm back with some more boxing. It is that time, another Ego official prediction. Now, the thing I like about the Saturday card with Premier Boxing Champs is just the overall event. I think it's big for boxing coming back prime time. And in addition to that, I think these are harder predictions. Like some of the other predictions, like Triple G versus Martin Murray, I made my prediction. Well, I did the official video this year, but I pretty much hinted at who I was going for, and it was Triple G in 2014. That wasn't hard for me to pick that particular fight. But these two fights are pretty hard. This card that they have with Premier Boxing Champs, which is good because that means the fights are competitive. Now, I already did Broner versus Molina. Check that out on the channel. Now, this is my prediction for Robert Guerrero versus Keith Thurman. Now, this is a great fight for a few different reasons. I'm going to break it down, go over some of those variables. One thing I like about this fight is the people, the public, has by and large requested that Keith Thurman put his money where his mouth is. By that meaning, he needs to, all the stuff he's articulate, he's calling people out, he has been for a while, but we have yet to see him fight a top 10 in prime or someone considered in prime out of the 147-pound division. So Robert Guerrero is just that. He's a guy that ranks in the top 10, a guy that's been in there with Mayweather. I mean, you can dismiss his whole resume. Fighting Mayweather is huge. If you could honestly say you fought Mayweather, that's experience. If you fight guys like Cotto, Mayweather, Pacquiao, that's tremendous experience to fight that level of competition. You know what I mean? So you had to put yourself, most likely, unless it was early in the career, you had to put yourself in that position. So we're getting to see Thurman take his step-up challenge on a big stage. And then for Robert Guerrero, he is a few fights removed from a loss to Floyd Mayweather. Before that, his welterweight run was doing good. He beat Selçuk Aydin, hopped up 2 weight classes after a long layoff. Then he went back and pretty much battered Berto. Had a little bit of difficulty at the very end. Berto showed a lot of heart in that fight. And then he lost to Mayweather. Disappeared for a minute. I heard he was suing Golden Boy, and he was out from the spotlight. And then he came back. He was like, this is the new me. I'm doing CrossFit. And he had a war with Kamagai. Now, for my pick, it was hard, but I'm picking Keith Thurman. And the reason I'm picking Keith Thurman, I'm going to say by decision. I'm picking it because I think Robert Guerrero is tough as nails. So I don't know. I think Keith Thurman is capable of dropping him. Like a knockdown wouldn't surprise me. But actually getting him out of there and stopping him without taking too much of a gamble, I don't know if that will be the case. Now, one of the factors is you look at both guys' last fight. And see, this is the difference between me when I break down fights and other people. Some people only, like, I study these guys, like, history, their whole catalog. Like, if there's a musical, even music, if there's a music artist like Tupac, I look at his whole discography. I don't look at just his last album and say he's trash. I look at his body of work. Now, I think a lot of people are grossly inaccurate when they're talking about Keith Thurman's last fight versus Leonard Bundu. Like, you got to put things in perspective, and that's what I stress on my channel. Leonard Bundu was, one, undefeated. It's harder to take an undefeated fighter's O. We all know that. I don't know anyone that can even really dispute that and say it's easier to beat an undefeated fighter. But if you feel froggish, then I guess leave a comment and explain how it's easier to snatch somebody's undefeated record. The other thing is Bundu is an Olympian, and he kept switch hitting. So it made it pretty problematic. And Keith Thurman really dominated that fight. It wasn't, in my honest opinion, I was bored. Like I was typing on Twitter, leaving you guys messages and stuff like that. But I was bored, and it was really because Leonard Bundu, he was content going the distance, saying, hey, I went the distance with one time with, you know what I mean, this feared puncher. He didn't make the fight. And that happens in boxing. I could tell you countless examples off the top of my head, really, where this has been the case, where you see a guy and then they're just content going the distance. Look at Hiadamo Rigondeaux versus Joseph Igbeko. Igbeko, he felt Rigondeaux's speed, his power, what he brought to the table, the dynamics of a fighter, and I felt he sold out. He wasn't willing to go in the trenches like when he gave Abnamatis a tough first fight. He was overmatched, and he was content just going the distance and making it out without, you know what I mean, getting knocked out. So Rigondeaux versus Igbeko is one of those fights. Another fight, Mikey Garcia versus Juan Carlos Burgos. I think that's another fight. Mikey Garcia was pushing the fight. He was actually more aggressive than he had been in recent fights. And Burgos, for whatever reason, he just felt the power or the dynamic of Mikey Garcia, and he was content just going the distance. He wasn't trying to make the fight, and that was another fight that turned out to be a lot more boring than I thought it was going to be, because you really got one guy pushing the action. Some people will compare like Canelo versus Mayweather. I don't compare those fights. I think Floyd is just he's a cut above fighters like that, and I honestly felt Canelo was trying. It just he whatever he brought to the table would not work. Same thing when Mayweather fought Robert Guerrero. I don't feel Robert Guerrero just simply just gave up and wasn't trying. He tried different things. Like he was trying to be more aggressive. Then he tried to box. I seen specific spots in the fight where he tried to make those adaptations and it just didn't work. He was just outmatched. But then you have other cases like Leonard Bundu, Keith Thurman, where I really honestly feel Keith Thurman was boxing more. He wasn't as aggressive, his usual aggressive self, but Leonard Bundu did literally nothing to, after he got knocked down, he really did nothing to like try to win the fight. He was clearly losing. He's not a known knockout puncher, and he wasn't doing anything to change the tone or the pace after the knockdown. So you can't really blame Keith Thurman for that. A lot of people get mad, oh, Keith Thurman, like say stupid shit, he's a runner now and all this off of one performance. But again, I think a lot of you who claim to be boxing fans, you don't really know what you're looking at. And you're putting too much stock in the Keith Thurman's last performance. Because in all actuality, my honest opinion is Robert Guerrero's fight with Kamagai was more entertaining. But without a doubt, you know what I mean? The Thurman Bundu was boring. But again, it was boring because you had one guy and he was just content surviving. So without a doubt, you know what I mean, Robert Guerrero versus Kamagai, that was a potential fight of the year because both guys were banging, both guys were chunking, you know what I mean, they were scrapping. Although Guerrero had the more entertaining fight, I think Thurman looked better in his fight. And what I mean by that is he dominated. He knocked his dude down and he dominated. He looked better in terms of the type of opponent he had in front of him. He didn't really leave any room for doubts. Bundu did nothing to embarrass him, even though he kept switching from southpaw to orthodox, and shit like that. He had nothing for him. He had no answers. Versus the Robert Guerrero fight, I thought Guerrero, he started boxing the first couple of rounds, and he completely abandoned the boxing aspect, and he started going into the phone booth and just brawling and not boxing this dude and just like scrapping, you know what I'm saying? And I think Robert Guerrero made that fight a lot harder than it needed to be. Now, from a fan's perspective, again, it was cool because it was a fight of the year type of in the trenches type of war. But you took a Japanese guy, and if you notice, Kamagai, he was also on the Khan Alexander card, I want to say, under the undercards, because of Robert Guerrero. He made that. Robert Guerrero basically took a fight that should have been easy work, and he made this guy survive and you know what I mean, went the distance with him and made it into a war. So that guy, he made him into a star. Now the guy got more, you know what I mean, Showtime dates. He got a date in December off of that performance because he held his own and it was a war and a fight of the year type fight. So in my opinion, you're not supposed to make guys like that look like stars. You're supposed to make them look like, hey, there's levels to this shit. So in terms of that, Keith Thurman really did that. Like he showed the different, and this was an Olympian. He showed that there's a separation. There's this UK former Olympian where he's at in the welterweight division, even though he's undefeated, and me being an American champion undefeated where I'm at. And he showed that separation. Robert Guerrero in his last fight didn't really show separation. It was just entertaining because of the type of fight it was. But I thought Guerrero made that way harder than he needed to be. So that's definitely one reason. I think, if anything, I learned that Keith Thurman, he has more tricks up his sleeve. He can box when he has to. So he doesn't have to just bang. And I also I think one of my favorite, if not my favorite, Keith Thurman performance was the Diego Chavez fight. That was an entertaining fight. And Chavez really brought it to him early in the fight and forced him to switch things up and made him make some adjustments because he was losing. Keith Thurman was losing the close exchanges, the inside fighting, and the brawling. He was in there with a tough Argentine that had power and that can crack, and he was losing that phone booth battle. So he had to make some adjustments, go back to pure boxing. So that's pretty much one of the big reasons I like Keith Thurman in this fight, because I've seen more adjustments. As Robert Guerrero's evolved and got into the welterweight division, I'm not seeing the same boxer that I seen at featherweight or in the lighter divisions. I'm seeing more of a guy who's kind of just showing how tough he is and the machismo. And against a big puncher like Keith Thurman, I don't know how good that will be for him. Yeah, it'll prove that you're tough and you have a beard, but it's not necessarily the look you want to go for. So I think I've seen a little bit more dynamic in terms of Keith Thurman's fight game than Guerrero in their last performances and just in recent memory. I thought like the way Guerrero fought Berto worked for Berto. Berto was also off like a 15-month layoff because he tested positive for a PED. Then I felt Guerrero kind of went in there, that same mentality. And Mayweather said it before the fight. He said, "This the real one. I'm no Berto." Mayweather said that to him. And I felt like Guerrero kind of went in there trying to, I guess he thought Mayweather wasn't as elusive as he was, but he went in there trying to rough him up like Berto. And it's not. There's two different levels. What Mayweather does and Berto does, two different things. Mayweather's actually good at the shoulder roll versus Berto did it for whatever, God knows what reason, and it didn't work out in the Guerrero fight. So I'm liking Keith Thurman's chances in this fight. I think he, no disrespect to Guerrero, he's from the Bay Area just like me. I think he's tough. I think Guerrero's not going to give up. But I think his pride and his recent style, his newfound style where he's just staying in the pocket and or trying to mug guys, it's not always going to work. Especially like you went in there with Alberto who was off a 15-month layoff. You and Keith Thurman, before your last fights, before Kamagai and before Bundu, you guys were off long layoffs because, like I said earlier in the video, Guerrero was doing legal troubles and probably just chilling because he made all that money in the Mayweather fight. And then Keith Thurman had a shoulder injury after Julio Diaz, and he took some time off letting his shoulder repair. So looking at both persons' fights, I was more impressed with Keith Thurman, even though it was a boring fight based on what he showed me, as opposed to Guerrero went in there with the absolute nobody and let him hang around and made it more difficult. So I'm rocking with Keith Thurman via decision. I think it's a good fight. I think Robert Guerrero's just like his name, Guerrero, that means warrior. So I think he is a warrior. I think he's going to hang around and be tough enough to pretty much go the distance and probably have spots where he does good. But ultimately, I think Keith Thurman, he's going to land some of the tougher blows and just ultimately win and land the more impactful shots. I wouldn't be surprised if there was a knockdown, if Keith Thurman knocks Robert Guerrero down. I don't know if Guerrero's been down. I think it's an excellent fight. It's a good fight. I could be completely wrong, but that's my prediction. Keith Thurman via unanimous decision. I think it's a good fight, and we're seeing where Robert Guerrero is at. He's been wanting to prove that he's a top welterweight. Came up short in the Mayweather fight, so let's see if he can prove me wrong in this particular fight and derail a guy who's making the type of noise that Keith Thurman is making. And the last thing I want to add about Keith Thurman, why I like his chances, is the fact that Keith Thurman, a lot of people don't give him credit because they're like, oh, he hasn't fought nobody, which you can argue, you know what I'm saying? By far, I'm not saying he has a great resume, but again, neither does Triple G in my opinion, you know what I'm saying? But I think they're both great fighters, even though their resume is not world class or anything like that. But one thing people to overlook with Keith Thurman is this. He's gotten some guys out of, like Berto got stopped in the 12th round by Jesus Soto Caras. Maidana, I think, got him out of there in the 7th round, and Jesus Soto Caras was disputing the stoppage. Like he was mad that he got that the judge waved it off. It was on the Canelo Josecito Lopez undercard. And I remember Maidana, that was his first fight with Robert Garcia, if I'm not mistaken. And Jesus Soto Caras, he was hurt, but he was disputing it. But then when Jesus Soto Caras fought Keith Thurman, there was no disputing. He was clearly out. Like, you know what I'm saying? He got slept in San Antonio, even though Keith Thurman said it was San Diego. And then you look at Julio Diaz. Julio Diaz gave problems to Amir Khan at a catchweight before Amir Khan officially moved up to welterweight. Keith Thurman destroyed Julio Diaz and pretty much forced him to retire on the stool. But Julio Diaz also fought Sean Porter twice. The second one, he got blasted. But the first fight was a split draw, I think. It was a draw in the fight with Sean Porter. So you've seen Sean Porter look rough around the edges, like he needed to make some improvements. And it didn't take two times. Like, it took Sean Porter 2 times, 2 cracks at it to officially beat Julio Diaz and get the decision versus a draw. And then when you're looking at Keith Thurman fighting these guys, and it's not too much as times pass. Like, it's not like, okay, Mayweather, when he fought Carlos Baldomir versus when Canelo fought Carlos Baldomir. because that's two different versions of Carlos Baldomir. Baldomir, when Canelo fought him, was 40, 41 years old. Mayweather didn't fight a 40, 41-year-old. So it'd be one thing if it was that extreme of a time gap, but that's not the case. Sean Porter fought Julio Diaz, I believe, in 2012, and then Keith Thurman fought him maybe in May or like, you know what I mean, springtime of 2014. So, you know what I'm saying? It's not like so much time has passed. And Keith Thurman exterminated Jesus Soto Karass, where Berto struggled. Maidana, it took 7 rounds or whatever to get him out of there. And Keith Thurman got him out sooner. And then you look at the, like I said, Julio Diaz, he knocked Amir Khan down, gave him a run for his money, and Keith Thurman blasted him out. And I don't do triangle theories, but I'm just saying a lot of people don't give credit for how Keith Thurman is handling business. Also with Diego Chavez, I thought Timothy Bradley beat Diego Chavez, but Diego Chavez won some rounds, and it was considered a draw, versus when Keith Thurman fought Diego Chavez, it was a stoppage. So you got to give credit. Like, even though his resume is not up there, you got to give credit for what he has done and what he has accomplished at a young age. For a guy who's considered unproven, he sure is getting these guys out of here in an impressive fashion. Well, drop me a comment. Let me know what you guys think. I made this a little bit longer than I wanted, but I had to go over some different things. Make sure you like my video as always. Hate, comment, and subscribe. Till next video is Ego signing off.